Arpeggio of Blue Steel is a mixed bag anime with many genres ranging from action, war, adventure, as well as a bit of pseudo harem slapped in as a cheeky side course. It may seem like an intriguing anime at first with the whole novelty of sentient battleships under the disguise of female humanoids. The entire experience of Arpeggio of Blue Steel will be somewhat indifferent, to say the least. Our story kicks off with humanity at war, set in the murky offshores fighting against a mystical force known as the Fleet of Fog. The world as we currently know has lost much of its landmass by the ocean due to rising sea levels and global warming. The main protagonist, Gunzo, a young high school student, is given the task by the Japanese government to save the world by commanding a defected submarine from the Fog, otherwise known as Iona. While being accompanied by his colleagues, his goal is to deliver a set of blueprints for a weapon to the United States that will give mankind the cutting edge to fight against the evil Armada. If there's anything remotely interesting about this anime, you'll probably be finding yourself more attached to the concepts of the female battleships exhibiting their own agendas than the actual story itself. The story, while at first glance looks promising, the show doesn't exactly present itself on an epic scale as it's supposed to suggest. Throughout the entire series, the pacing runs at such a rapid degree, there's almost no time to get yourself properly accustomed with the setting. While it's clear to the audience there's a war going on in the first episode, the show doesn't exactly do a convincing job in informing you of its prerequisite events. We never know how the Fleet of Fog appeared in the human world, nor does it give any hints where they originated from. Rather, the majority of the anime just assumes the audience should be left feeling perplexed. After being shown a brief battle scene in the first episode, we're haphazardly catapulted into a flashback where we are shown a rather tedious backstory. Huh? Just what was the point of this? Are we supposed to suddenly care about them now? Most importantly, what happened to Gunzo and his crew in this 2-year time span? We just never know, nor are we extensively shown it. For the most part, we're following Gunzo and his crew, and it's fair to say that his crew barely have any significant role in the story except to act as a minor support cast. What I can certainly say though is that the show does a better job in characterizing its female mental models, i.e. the battleships themselves. Iona, initially conceived as your generic innocent moe blob, goes through the most character development from beginning to end. Even though she may not be the most likable character of the battleship pack, in my honest opinion there are enough characters from the Fleet of Fog that exhibit enough personality that make them all the worthwhile paying attention to. Even if we're supposed to perceive the Fog as the bad guys, we begin to identify them as much more than just war machines. They start questioning themselves of what it means to be human, what it means to be alive, and what they could be doing with their lives other than just fighting humanity. Though they do display some flawed traits in how they behave, which is by all means nice for the audiences to empathize with them, the writing for their part of the show does get rather cliche and repetitive, especially during their own monologues. Not to mention some inconsistencies, including mood dissonance that totally ruins the seriousness of the show, that and the prominent fan service during the beach episode. Seriously though, just what was the intent of this scene when Haruna was examining herself in the mirror completely half nude?
人類復職士のデータを送る。これから地上で行動することを考えると改善した方が良さそうだ。こちらも同様の結論を得た。
How are we supposed to take the tone of this scene seriously when they're subtly exploiting her assets while accompanying it with dark, heavy orchestra music? We never know. We just know it's more laughable than it is intelligent fan service. As for Gunzo himself, well, his character is rather bland and one-dimensional if I'm being honest. Sure, he may be a good tactician when it comes to fighting, but he never seems to question himself of what his objectives are meant to entail. His flashbacks were supposed to indicate something of his past life, but we never get a sense of urgency through his idiosyncrasy. He just seems to arbitrarily go with the flow without revealing too much of himself. I'll admit he's a strong-willed person, make no mistake, but there's almost next to nothing for him being a likable character apart from his assertive notion for leadership and gambling. While it's easy to perceive the story and characters with many imperfections, the production values for Arpeggio of Blue Steel was definitely a high point for this series. Universally known for its CGI cel shading animation. As far as my perception goes, a lot of avid anime watchers will undoubtedly find this style of animation to be polarizing. Not because the animation design is by any means bad, but because everyone is just so used to watching mainstream digital and old school cel animation. For me, the whole aesthetic of the CGI was for the most part quite okay and presentable. The action scenes were animated in a very slick fashion, paying much detail to the weapon projectiles being used in combat, which gradually picks up in quality into the final third of the show. What also stood out for me was the alternate dimension where the fog members interconnect through their own minds. Here the animation style gives a rather chilly yet gloomy atmosphere, and it really captures your attention when they're engaging in a serious conversation. Though the exterior design of the ships themselves looks quite tacky at first, in my eyes the character designs was by far the strongest facet. Each and every character has their own distinct wardrobe of clothing. Their looks are also easily distinguishable by how the fog members' attire also reflects the colouring of their corresponding ship vessel. Despite the fact that most of the characters aren't properly developed across the series, you'll still remember a good majority of them due to how clear-cut the CGI augments itself with their unique appearances. No really, they all look fantastically distinct, if not fairly cute to look at. However, there is a caveat with the animation. If there's one thing that was disquieting, it would have to be the intensive fluid movement of the characters themselves. I don't know if Japan has some natural fascination in approaching the uncanny valley, but in all honesty, the movements of the characters occasionally felt incredibly intimidating to look at. The way their movements were animated, such as the head tilting, was done to such a drastic threshold, it felt as though I was watching a real-life android giving me freakish stares rather than watching an anime character drawn in a fictional universe. Now, granted, it's not like this all the time, but it's definitely something viewers should be cautious of. The soundtrack composed by Masato Koda was overall pretty acceptable. A good variety of tracks matched the mood of the scenes rather well, with a few exceptions as mentioned earlier. Although a lot of them weren't impressively memorable, I did personally find the opening song to be exquisitely sensational. It just has this very spunky feel that really gets your blood going in your veins to elicit high anticipations. So is Arpeggio of Blue Steel worth watching? If you go in with a serious mindset as the first episode implies it to be, you'll likely be disappointed by its incomplete screenplay and an endless amount of inconsistencies. We don't know if there will be a second season despite how much of the universe there is left to explore, but regardless of its incompletion, there are some facets that can be appreciated from this show. The terrific character designs and opening song are definitely the highlights for this series, even if it suffers from underwhelming storytelling and lopsided characterization. The series may have a rocky start, but it gradually picks itself up into the latter half of the show, so if you're a person with a fair amount of patience, Blue Steel is definitely a series worth sitting through upon reaching its beautiful climax. At the time of this video release, the anime is yet to be fully licensed, so the chances of there being any DVD releases, especially in the West, is pretty skeptical at this given period, but the entirety of the show is available for legal streaming at Crunchyroll. Other anime recommendations is none other than Gargantia on the Verdurous Planet, an anime with a serene and similar setting, as well as Code Geass, a show with well-defined and developed characters and a comparable storyline that should be more to your liking. This has been Vinny of JJ Atelier. Until I greet again, keep it classy.